You know what's absolutely hilarious? When a bunch of high and mighty alien military instructors discover that their carefully constructed battle scenarios don't account for one simple fact: humans are basically space possums with anxiety and nuclear weapons. But here's what's even funnier: sometimes those space possums turn out to be tactical geniuses who can revolutionize warfare by simply refusing to play by anyone else's rules. I should know. I was there when Cadet Sarah Chen broke the Galactic Military Academy's most sophisticated battle simulation by simply walking away. But let me back up a bit. You're going to want all the context for this one, trust me. First, some introductions. I'm Senior Observer Zyx'tari of the Unified Species Military Command, and my job is to document training exercises. Usually this means watching various species fumble through standardized drills while trying not to accidentally activate their fight or flight responses in spectacularly embarrassing ways. But humans? They're different. They don't just have fight or flight, they have fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and what I've come to call their fuck around and find out response. It's quite impressive, really, once you get past the sheer terror of watching a species treat mortal danger like an inconvenient scheduling conflict. The events I'm about to describe took place during my 15th cycle at the Academy, right after the controversial decision to start accepting human candidates. The military brass had finally decided that any species capable of surviving on a death world while simultaneously inventing both nuclear fusion and something called reality television probably had something to teach us about warfare. The day in question started like any other at the Academy. The morning sun of Centauri Prime cast its purple glow over the training grounds, where various species were gathering for the annual Interspecies Combat Excellence Trials. Picture, if you will, a football field-sized arena filled with holographic projectors, combat drones, and enough sensors to make a surveillance state blush. The air was thick with tension and the peculiar smell of nervous Helixians releasing their anxiety spores. Cadet Sarah Chen was the only human in that year's class, and, oh, what a fascinating specimen she was. Standing at what her species considered an average height of 5'. She looked almost comically small next to the 9-foot-tall Counterattack warriors and the floating gasbag Helixians. But there was something about her that made even the most seasoned instructors nervous. Maybe it was the way she seemed to be perpetually amused by everything around her. Or perhaps it was her unsettling habit of solving problems in ways that made absolutely no sense to anyone else. The instructor for the day's exercise was Grand Commander Vex Thor of the Therellian Empire. Think peacock meets praying mantis with a Napoleon complex. He'd spent the last 3 cycles designing what he considered the perfect combat scenario, one that would finally prove that traditional military doctrine was superior to what he called human chaos theory. Now I should mention that Vex Thor had something of a personal vendetta against human innovation in military tactics. 2 cycles earlier, his perfectly orchestrated training program had been completely derailed by another human cadet who'd won a siege scenario by teaching the enemy AI to play something called rock, paper, scissors, until it became so obsessed with the game that it forgot to maintain the siege. The incident had been quietly classified under unforeseen system anomalies, but Vex Thor's left eye still twitched whenever someone mentioned paper products. The morning began with the traditional pre-exercise briefing, where Vex Thor took great pleasure in explaining just how doomed everyone was going to be. The briefing room was a stark amphitheater designed to accommodate all known sentient body types, from the methane-breathing Therellians who had their own sealed section to the amorphous blob collective, who shared a large heated pool in the back. Today's exercise. Vex Thor announced with all the smugness of someone who thought they'd designed the perfect trap, will test your species' natural combat responses against overwhelming odds. The scenario is simple: you're surrounded by enemy forces, your weapons are disabled, and you must survive for 30 minutes. The other cadets chittered, buzzed, and vibrated in anticipation. The Counterattack warriors flexed their armored plates, causing several nearby chairs to crumple. The Helixians puffed up to twice their size, accidentally pushing a junior observer into the blob collective's pool. He was fine, just a bit gelatinous for the rest of the day. Sarah Chen? She yawned. Actually yawned. I had to suppress a laugh as I watched Vex Thor's anterior antennae twitch in annoyance. Additionally, Vex Thor continued, his voice rising an octave, we've implemented new anti-exploitation protocols to prevent any creative interpretations of the exercise parameters. He looked directly at Chen as he said this, who responded by taking out a small metal container and consuming something that my scanners identified as instant noodles. How she heated them without any visible technology remains a mystery to this day. The briefing continued with Vex Thor explaining the various ways in which they'd improved the simulation's AI, enhanced the holographic enemy's tactical responses, and eliminated all the loopholes that previous human cadets had exploited. Chen spent this time drawing what appeared to be small cartoon characters in her notebook. I later learned these were something called memes, and they were surprisingly accurate caricatures of the instruction staff. As the cadets filed out to prepare for the exercise, I overheard a conversation between Chen and Zyx'tari, one of the Counterattack warriors. Zyx'tari was explaining his species' traditional battle strategies, which mostly involved hitting things until they stopped being things. But tiny human Zyx'tari rumbled, "How can you expect to survive without engaging in glorious combat? Your species lacks natural armor, significant mass, or even basic acid spraying capabilities." Chen looked up from her noodles, chopsticks hovering midair. "Have you ever heard of Sun Tzu?" she asked. "Is that some kind of human weapon?" "Something like that," she replied with a grin that would have made a Cheshire cat proud. "He once said that supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." "That makes no sense," Zyx'tari declared. "Breaking requires contact. Contact requires fighting." Maybe Chen shrugged, or maybe you just haven't tried asking the enemy out for coffee yet. I made a note to research what coffee was. Later analysis would reveal it to be some kind of liquid stimulant that humans consumed in quantities that would be lethal to most other species. This explains so much about their behavior. The simulation began with a flash of light that transformed the sterile white arena into a war-torn cityscape. Holographic enemies materialized, hundreds of them armed with various weapons that the system assured us were accurately calibrated to each species' survival thresholds. Each cadet was isolated in their own sector, unable to see or assist the others. The Counterattack immediately went into berserker mode, charging through walls and trying to physically intimidate holograms which, unsurprisingly, weren't particularly impressed by chest thumping. The Helixians attempted their species' traditional defensive maneuver of releasing confusion spores which, again, didn't work so well against computer-generated opponents. The Blob Collective tried to absorb and analyze the holographic enemies, leading to some very interesting system errors and a brief period where all the enemies displayed in hot pink. But Sarah Chen? She looked around, scratched her head, and did something that made every instructor's jaw drop. She found a relatively intact building, walked inside, barricaded the door with some debris, sat down, just sat down. Then she pulled out another container of instant noodles. The control room erupted in chaos. "She's malfunctioning," one instructor screamed, their tentacles tying themselves in knots. "Perhaps the human's fear response has paralyzed it," another suggested, already drafting a paper on human stress reactions. "Someone checked the neural monitors," a third called out. "She might be having what humans call a Monday." Vex Thor was practically molting in frustration. "This is not the correct response. She's supposed to engage the enemy. Where's the desperate last stand? The heroic charge? The dramatically appropriate final words?" I, however, noticed something interesting. While everyone was focused on what Chen wasn't doing, they failed to notice what she was doing. She was watching. Observing. Taking notes on her datapad about enemy patrol patterns. And occasionally she'd mutter something that my universal translator rendered as "stupid video game AI always follows the same routes." Something else was happening too. The holographic enemies were becoming increasingly agitated by their inability to engage with a target that wasn't behaving like, well, a target. They began to show signs of confusion, their programmed responses unable to cope with a scenario where the opponent simply refused to play along. 20 minutes into the simulation, while the other cadets were exhausting themselves fighting endless waves of enemies, Chen finally moved. She had mapped out every patrol route, identified every spawn point, and most importantly found all the holes in the AI's programming. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations to come, though usually with a lot of headaches and confused instructors asking "but why?" Chen began her counterattack by simply walking between patrol routes during their reset cycles. The holographic enemies, programmed to respond to rapid movement and aggressive actions, literally couldn't see her casual stroll through their ranks. When she needed to cross a heavily guarded area, she'd throw a piece of debris in the opposite direction, sending all the AI units investigating the noise like curious cats chasing a laser pointer. But it wasn't just about exploiting AI limitations. Chen was demonstrating something fundamental about combat that thousands of years of military doctrine had somehow overlooked. Sometimes the most powerful position is refusing to engage on your opponent's terms. 25 minutes in, She had reached the simulation's control node, a fact that nobody in the control room had even noticed, because they were too busy arguing about her failure to engage the best part. She'd done it while finishing her noodles. "Excuse me," she called out, waving at the observation window. "Is this important?" She was pointing at what appeared to be the simulation's main power coupling, which was, rather foolishly, incorporated into the physical arena design. "Don't touch that," Vex Thor screeched. "That's not part of the simulation." "Oh, it's not. My bad," Chen replied with the most innocent smile I've ever seen on a Deathworlder. "I just thought, since it's got all these blinky lights and exposed wires. By the way, you might want to update your security protocols. These access panels still use the factory default codes. Also, whoever wrote note to self. Password is password 123 on a sticky note really needs to attend a basic security seminar." The entire room went silent as the implications sank in. In 30 minutes, without firing a single shot or engaging in any traditional combat, Chen had not only survived but had also identified and reached a critical weakness in the actual facility's infrastructure. If this had been a real combat situation, she could have taken control of or destroyed the entire complex. But, you didn't fight anything," Vex Thor sputtered. "The exercise was to test combat responses." Chen shrugged, finishing the last of her noodles. "With all due respect, sir, you said the exercise was to survive for 30 minutes against overwhelming odds. You never specified that we had to fight. In fact, engaging in direct combat when severely outgunned would have been tactically stupid. Also, these noodles are really good. Want some?" I couldn't help myself. I started laughing. Here was this entire facility, designed by the greatest military minds in the galaxy, and a human cadet had just walked through its defenses like a tourist in a park, all while enjoying a snack. The aftermath was even better. The Academy's review board spent weeks trying to decide if Chen had passed or failed the exercise. The debate sessions were legendary, with one particularly memorable argument about whether aggressive noodle consumption could be classified as a combat technique. The transcripts read like a comedy script. Senior reviewer, but she didn't engage the enemy. Chen's defender, she engaged with their psychological expectations. Another reviewer, she ate noodles. Chen's defender, tactical sustenance acquisition during field operations. Vex Thor, she literally walked through the battlefield. Chen's defender, advanced stealth techniques utilizing psychological warfare through behavioral subversion. Senior reviewer, she found our actual security weaknesses instead of fighting the simulation. Chen's defender ... isn't that better? In the end, they had to pass her. Not because she followed their rules, but because she proved their rules were fundamentally flawed. As Chen explained in her after-action report, which, by the way, included detailed schematics of every security vulnerability she'd spotted, along with restaurant recommendations for the best noodle places near the Academy. The greatest victory isn't winning the battle, it's avoiding it altogether while achieving your objective. Also, you guys really need to change your admin passwords from admin 123. Just saying. P.S. The cafeteria really needs to stock better noodles. This is a security issue as it forces cadets to bring their own provisions, creating potential contraband routes. The story spread through the galactic military community like wildfire. Here was proof that humans weren't just Deathworlders with impressive endurance and a shocking tolerance for poisons, they call it coffee, and apparently the noodles were just the tip of their culinary courage. They were something far more dangerous. They were smart, lazy problem solvers who would rather find a way around a problem than through it. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Within a year, the Academy had completely revamped its training protocols. They now included exercises specifically designed to test alternative problem-solving approaches, though everyone knew they really meant watching for weird human tricks. Security across all military installations was enhanced to guard against what became known as the casual walk strategy. The changes weren't just technical. The entire philosophy of military education began to shift. Species that had previously relied solely on their natural advantages, the Counterattack strength, the Helixians' chemical warfare capabilities, the blob collectives. Blobbiness started exploring more diverse tactical approaches. Thrix, the Counterattack warrior who had questioned Chen's methods, became one of the strongest advocates for this new approach. He was later quoted saying, "Sometimes, not hitting things is the hardest hit of all," which became the title of his best-selling military philosophy book. Chen graduated at the top of her class and went on to revolutionize galactic military doctrine. Her thesis, The Path of Least Resistance: Why Traditional Combat Theory Fails in Modern Warfare, is now required reading at the Academy. She even added a special acknowledgement in it to Grand Commander Vex Thor, whose perfectly designed simulation taught me more about real combat than any battle ever could. P.S. I finally found out whose sticky note that was. The revolution didn't stop there. Chen's approach inspired a whole new generation of tactical innovations across species lines. The Helixians developed a technique they called strategic ambience manipulation, which was basically their version of walking away but with more floating. The Blob Collective created an entirely new form of non-confrontational warfare that involved looking so convincingly like part of the landscape that enemy forces would simply give up trying to figure out where they ended, and the terrain began. As for me, I've made it my mission to document every human cadet that comes through the academy. So far, I've seen them win scenarios by taking naps, making friends with the enemy AI, and in one memorable instance, starting a holographic dance party that crashed the entire system, because apparently the combat AI really likes something called the Macarena. The humans keep surprising us. Last week, a new cadet won a space combat scenario by convincing the enemy fleet that their ships had been infected by something called a computer virus, and that the only cure was to download a file called totally_not_shutdown_command.exe. The worst part? It worked. But perhaps the most important lesson we learned from Cadet Chen wasn't about security protocols or combat tactics. It was about perspective. While we were all busy building bigger weapons and stronger armor, humans were asking, yeah, but what if we just didn't? They taught us that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a weapon at all, it's the ability to step back, observe, and find the path that no one else thought to look for. They showed us that victory doesn't always wear armor or carry a weapon. Sometimes it carries instant noodles and a remarkably casual attitude toward mortal danger. The day Sarah Chen walked away from that battle drill, she didn't just win a training exercise, she completely changed how the galaxy thinks about warfare. And she did it without firing a single shot or spilling a single noodle. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go change my security passwords. All of them. Again. Apparently password 123 isn't much better than admin 123. And before you ask, no, Noodles for Life isn't an acceptable alternative, no matter how many times Cadet Chen suggests it. The aftermath of what became known as the Chen Incident continued to ripple through galactic military doctrine in unexpected ways. Training scenarios had to be completely redesigned to account for what instructors now termed human lateral thinking, though most of us just called it the weird stuff humans do when they're bored. One particularly memorable change came when the Academy tried to Chen-proof their systems by implementing what they called mandatory engagement protocols. The idea was simple: cadets would be required to engage in combat at least once every 5 minutes during simulations. The very next day, a human cadet completed the exercise by engaging in what she called aggressive high-fiving with the holographic enemies. Technically, it was combat contact. The fact that it also caused the AI to short-circuit trying to reciprocate the high fives was, according to her, totally not intentional. The security upgrades weren't much more successful. After Chen's graduation, the Academy invested millions of credits in a new unhackable system. 3 days later, they found a human cadet had gained administrator access by convincing the AI that he was its long-lost cousin twice removed. The worst part? He'd used a knock-knock joke to do it. But the real revolution came in the form of what humans called the Chen Doctrine. Its basic principle was deceptively simple: the best way to win a war is to make your enemy question whether they're even fighting one. It turned out that confusion was a surprisingly effective tactical advantage. Take, for example, the Therellian border conflict of 2847. A fleet of hostile ships had positioned themselves along the border, clearly preparing for invasion. The human commander in charge of defense took one look at the situation and, instead of deploying battleships, sent out a fleet of maintenance vessels. They proceeded to act like the hostile fleet had actually called for roadside assistance. The enemy was so confused by the cheerful offers of space AI service that they completely forgot to invade. Chen herself went on to become one of the most decorated strategic advisors in the Unified Species Military Command. Her office became famous for its wall of strategic noodle varieties, each cup labeled with the battle it helped her think through. My personal favorite was the spicy overthinking ramen that apparently inspired the solution to the 3-day standoff at Beta Centauri, which she resolved by teaching both sides to play something called Among Us. These days, the Academy's entrance exam includes a section specifically designed to measure a candidate's ability to solve problems in unexpected ways. We call it the Chen Test, though its official name is Alternative Strategic Response Assessment. Last year, a candidate passed it by taking a nap during the test and claiming that their snoring was actually coded messages in binary. The scary part, they weren't lying. As I write this final report on the Chen Incident, I can't help but reflect on how one human cadet's refusal to play by the rules ended up rewriting them entirely. We thought we were teaching humans about galactic warfare. Instead, they taught us that sometimes the best way to win a battle is to make everyone stop and ask, wait, what just happened? End report Senior Observer Zyx'tari. P.S. If any humans are reading this, no, I will not tell you what my new passwords are. Stop asking and get out of my personal files. I know you're in there. P.S. And no, setting all the training drones to dance to staying alive is not an acceptable battle strategy. I don't care if it technically counts as psychological warfare. P.S. Who keeps putting instant noodle cups in my office? Classified addendum: since the implementation of the Chen Doctrine, galactic warfare incidents have decreased by 73%. Apparently, it's hard to maintain aggressive military campaigns when your enemy might respond by initiating an impromptu dance-off or challenging you to a game of space charades. The universe, it seems, is a much more interesting place when you stop trying to shoot everything and start wondering what would happen if you just offered it noodles instead. Official Academy Training Manual Update, Section 47.b. In the event of encountering human tactical innovation, do not attempt to logic your way through it. Logic has no power here. Just accept it and update the simulation parameters. Again,